Here's another little webinar to help you with Task 20 in your Jekyll and Hyde booklets. And this is where we explore Utterson's suspicions concerning the letter. Some of the questions that you're going to be asked to think about are: what does Utterson discover about the handwriting in the letter? We're going to try and highlight two quotations that show Utterson wants to keep this discovery secret. And we're going to be thinking about whether we would keep that secret. Would you keep Jekyll's secret? Why? Let's read the extract. "I should like to hear your views on that," replied Utterson. "I have a document here in his handwriting. It is between ourselves, for I scarce know what to do about it. It is an ugly business at the best, but there it is, quite in your way, a murderer's autograph." Guest's eyes brightened, and he sat down at once and studied it with passion. "No, sir," he said, "not mad, but it is an odd hand." "And by all accounts a very odd writer," added the lawyer. Just then the servant entered with a note. "Is that from Dr. Jekyll, sir?" inquired the clerk. "I thought I knew the writing. Anything private, Mr. Utterson?" "Only an invitation to dinner. Why? Do you want to see it?" "One moment, I thank you, sir." And the clerk laid the two sheets of paper alongside and sedulously compared their contents. "Thank you, sir," he said at last, returning both. "It's a very interesting autograph." There was a pause, during which Mr. Utterson struggled with himself. "Why did you compare them, Guest?" he inquired suddenly. "Well, sir," returned the clerk, "there's a rather singular resemblance. The two hands are in many points identical, only differently sloped." "Rather quaint," said Utterson. "It is, as you say, rather quaint," returned Guest. "I wouldn't speak of this note, you know," said the master. "No, sir," said the clerk, "I understand." But no sooner was Mr. Utterson alone that night than he locked the note into his safe, where it reposed from that time forward. What, he thought, Henry Jekyll forged for a murderer? And his blood ran cold in his veins. Some tricky vocabulary there might be sedulously, which just means that he carefully or very persistently looks at the letter and the handwriting in it. When Utterson says, "I scarce know what to do," he just means I hardly know what to do. When he says that the letters have a singular resemblance, it just means they have a very unique or remarkable similarity between them. So the handwriting is remarkably similar. And when the letter's put in the safe where it reposed, it's just that it lays there undisturbed. So what does Utterson discover? Well, he asked Guest to take a look at the letter from Hyde, as it was widely believed that you could tell much about someone's character from their handwriting. Guest confirms that this handwriting does not suggest madness, but definitely an odd character. During the scene, by chance, Utterson receives a letter from Jekyll inviting him to dinner. Guest compares the two letters closely and discovers that the handwriting is almost identical, but just sloped in different directions, suggesting that they come from the same handwriter. Utterson suspects that his friend Jekyll has forged the first letter on behalf of Hyde. This would make Jekyll an accomplice in the murder of Carew, or certainly suggest that he's been involved in a very dodgy way in what Hyde's been up to. Why would Utterson keep this secret for Jekyll? As you can see from the extract, Utterson is keen to keep this discovery between him and Guest. Let's have a look back at some of the quotations that suggest that to us. So even from the very outset, when Utterson first allows Guest to have a look at the letter that's supposedly written by Hyde, he makes a big thing about saying it's between ourselves, for I don't know, I scarcely know what to do about it. And he talks about it being an ugly business. And Guest is very quick to agree that they'll keep this between them. So they seem to make this pact that they won't talk about this at all. Later on, you see him being much more explicit. "I wouldn't speak of this note, you know," said the master. "No, sir," said the clerk, "I understand." And they're making it very clear that no one is to talk about this. It's something they're going to keep as very much a secret between them. And indeed, just before that, it suggests that Utterson is almost avoiding even talking about it to Guest. And when he sees Guest comparing the two letters, it says here, Mr. Utterson struggled with himself. It's almost as if he doesn't really want to ask the question in the first place. He doesn't really want to know what Guest is seeing in these two letters. It might be something that would be too much for him to hear. And you can see that at the end of the extract, that even when Guest has left and he's left alone with his secret, he chooses to do no more with it. He chooses to sort of repress it or hide it away. He puts the letter in his safe where it reposes from that time onwards. He does nothing to try and discover anything more. And this might be because he's frightened by what he might find if he goes and pursues this bit of information. You hear him saying what he thought Henry Jekyll forged for a murderer. And you see the fear in him when it says his blood run cold in his veins. He's shocked, he's terrified by what he might discover if he pursues this information. So, why would he keep this secret? Well, we see that he puts the letter in the safe and does not pursue it further. This might be because he's bound by his idea of the gentleman's code that you've talked about and heard about before. It would be sort of a convention of the time for a gentleman not to pry into the secrets of their friends. And this would be something that Utterson, as a very sort of typical gentleman and a very good friend to others, might hold very dear. It's something he might feel is very important. On another level, Utterson fears for his friend's reputation and safety. If he reveals this to anyone, Jekyll could suffer very badly. Discovery would at least cast suspicion on Jekyll over the murder and his role in this, and it might actually lead to his arrest. So does this hiding the secret, does this keeping it under his hat make Utterson a good friend, or does it make him an accomplice? Do you think Utterson made the right decision to keep the secret? You may think that this does make him a good friend. His instinct is clearly to protect Jekyll. You may think it makes him a potential accomplice, as he may be protecting a murderer. He's certainly not acting as a very good detective in this scene, because he fails to pursue a really important lead that might lead to the discovery of what's going on. And does his desire to protect Jekyll and keep the secret ultimately stop him from helping Jekyll? If he'd pursued it a bit further, would he have discovered things that may have made a big difference in the way things end up for Jekyll at the end of the story? Thank you very much for listening, Year 10, and I hope you've enjoyed the little webinar.